I'm Matt Tice with the Insurgent Mindset.
Hi, I'm Rondo Moses.
Great to see you, Rondo. What are we going
Likewise.
to be talking about today? What's our plan for
I
this?
thought I thought we'd talk about an issue that's on the minds of a lot of folks these days, and it's sustainability. And I think we could talk about sustainability through the perspective of the lens of insurgent versus incumbent organizations. I thought that would be interesting to talk about today.
Very good. It's one of the topics of our ages, and certainly under a lot of pressure politically at the moment. Very
Yeah.
interesting topic. So, set the table for us, Rondo. What's the lens through which we're going to look at this particular challenge, and how do we know whether we're being successful in communicating sustainability as from a point of view of the insurgent mindset?
Yes. So I think just stepping back in terms of, why talk about sustainability. I mean, this has been a topic that's been out there, that's been an issue for organizations to deal with for decades. But I think that in the last 10 to 15 years, it's gotten more pronounced, largely because of a couple of different factors. I mean, one, changing customer needs, consumer needs and expectations for organizations, particularly when you think about, the younger generations, the millennials and Gen Zs. They have expectation that organizations and brands should, provide sustainable products and, should be sustainable in terms of how they use our scarce resources as companies as well. So that's one. I also think that, increasing regulation has really put, sustainability at the forefront for companies to really deal with. I think initially, maybe it was limited to some industries, but as the chains, I would say, or the regulations have expanded to more and more industries, and the pressure is on for companies and brands to really think about sustainability in terms of how they operate their organizations, how they bring products to markets, the products themselves. That's also a big deal. And then just thinking about where the private equity and investment money is flowing to, right? There's a lot of pressure to focus on that sustainable space. I think it's something like $50 trillion globally really being pumped into sustainable solutions. And so I think that's another driver of why this is becoming a more pressing issue that companies really can't ignore.
Okay, and so you're saying that consumer behavior is changing, so that's drawing companies forward, or some companies on the front foot, some on the back foot, some being dragged and some pushing, I suppose.
Hmm.
Obviously, we have climate change as a key factor as well, sort of over the top of all of this. And whatever your views on climate change, certainly there is a very strong view amongst many parts of the economy that that's an issue that needs to be addressed. And certainly also, I guess in my mind is, we now have kind of technology playing a key role across virtually every part of the economy, providing new capability and solutions that maybe weren't available to us 20 years ago. So it seems to be
Right.
feeding itself at some level. Everything from enzymes to reduce methane emissions in cattle to additives in concrete and cement production to finally, uh, finally, innovation in nuclear, which has been pretty dormant for the last almost 50 years. So we are
Hmm.
seeing, I think, probably a tech imperative in climate and in sustainability as well that maybe we haven't seen so much of, in the last maybe 2 decades.
And I think to your point in terms of technology, I also think it's because those technologies are also making innovation, I mean, sustainability more profitable. So it's like, okay, with AI and the Internet of Things, maybe sustainability is a profitable direction for us as well.
I think it's a great point because if you look at sort of sustainability as an investment class, right? The growth in these companies and the capital being deployed to these companies, to your earlier point, is significant. So there are relatively high returns to be gathered as as investors in this particular asset class. So that's attractive. So
Right.
obviously, capital will flow and then innovation will follow. So I think it is, we're kind of getting to the point where it's almost a flywheel. And, we're seeing that more and more companies are playing a key role on the front foot to, I think you said it in our prep, it's a feature, not a bug. And I
Right.
think so. Let's characterize for a moment, kind of thinking about it from the insurgent incumbent divide. How does the incumbent leader think about sustainability? What's the mindset that kind of the back foot mindset, if you will, in the sustainability kind of focus for a firm?
Yeah. I think for most established firms, the approach to sustainability or perspective that they bring to sustainability has been more of compliance. With they do see the trends from consumers, they do, get push from, the regulatory environment and climate. And so it's more of a climate, it's more of a compliance with what the regulations are. So this is something that they have to do. I also think that they see it as maybe an initiative that they assign a team of folks in the organization to really work on, but it's not at the core of the organization's strategy. So I think it's just been sort of this compliance exercise that they have to do, and there's some people in organizations that are dedicated to it, but it's not necessarily integrated into the fabric of the organization and how they work and think.
Okay, so no doubt then the insurgent mindset's going to be a little bit different. So maybe build up a persona of the insurgent leader in terms of climate and sustainability. What are the characteristics of that individual, maybe the CEO, and how would you kind of characterize the culture of the sustainable insurgent?
I think the insurgent leader, of course, is an agile leader, really looking to experiment. They are, as we know, very focused on the market and the customer. So they understand that this is a requirement for customers and an expectation that the products and solutions that they'll develop will be sustainable, which will support, climate improvement in the climate change issue that we have. So they are approaching things through that lens because they are so close to the customer. So when you think about an insurgent organization, this sustainability is built into the organization's culture. It's when they develop a product and when they develop their strategy, I should start with, sustainability is at the center of that, not a compliance exercise for it. So they are approaching it through a totally different lens than an established organization. And so what that means is they're probably a much younger organization of perhaps millennials and even Gen Zers who really recognize the importance of sustainable products and solutions, and they think about the environment in which they're operating in as in being important to them as a team. And so when they develop products and services, they're keeping that in mind. It's not as an afterthought or an effect that has to be addressed after the fact. They're really thinking about it going into any development that they're doing.
Okay, so if I'm going to sort of step back for a second, then our insurgent mindset is much more about kind of every aspect of how a firm competes, engages with the market, attracts capital, manages its supply chain, delivers value to customers, and builds an operating system, an operating model, and culture that surrounds how sustainability is deeply embedded into all those elements. Is that kind of what you're
Mhm.
saying?
Yeah, so they're
Okay.
thinking of even if they're looking at their value chain, they're thinking about how sustainability sort of is integrated in that, like where are the opportunities to improve their sustainability objectives throughout their value chain, not just in one aspect of it.
Okay, so then the incumbent leader, in contrast, is obviously looking at this as a necessary evil. What can I get away with, and how can I do the minimum I need to do to comply? Now,
Right.
certainly there'll be listeners here saying, well, I'm that guy. My job is to comply with the law and maintain, the minimum standards, and maybe it's somebody else's problem. I guess how do you get signals from the market that kind of incremental or extra investment in sustainability is going to generate returns, real economic returns that will help shift the mindset. So I guess I'm thinking about, if your typical customer needs to buy raw chemicals and they're not really interested in the sustainability aspect of that, they just want that commodity delivered as cheaply as possible. One could imagine you'd find yourself in a compliance mindset. Whereas by comparison, excuse me, by comparison, if your customer and maybe your company um, is finds a compelling opportunity to differentiate by selling that sort of element, then that maybe people will pay that extra a little bit or a little, maybe you can give up a little bit of margin to get a little bit more volume on those green chemicals. So, there's always this competitive imperative that people have to deal with. How would you convince the incumbent leader to shift more attention to the sustainability agenda?
I think a part of that starts with really helping that incumbent leader to clarify their innovation strategy. So a part of that innovation strategy will be to exploit, their core business, right, and their core customers, exploitation of those markets, in a positive way, exploitation. But the other part of their innovation objectives has to also, or should, include some exploration, which is they're going into new areas that they've not necessarily been in before. Maybe this is an opportunity to think about how can you include sustainable goals in these new opportunities that you consider as a part of that exploration process, right? So
Hmm.
now you could be tapping into a whole new customer base that's not currently, in your space today, with and perhaps even with a totally new business model. So it's, I think, getting them to think about what are the criteria by which they will look at, let's say, new opportunities in the exploration space that you could probably insert more emphasis on sustainability and sustainable solutions right in that area.
Okay, so you brought up my favorite two words, business and model, right? So I think that there's an assumption that many incumbent leaders make that there's a zero-sum thing happening here where investments in sustainability, green tech, et cetera, come at a cost, but not necessarily a benefit. And I think the
Mhm.
insurgent leader plays the role of how do I create a different business model that gives me both, delivers me a lower cost curve, B, a better outcome for the environment, and then C, an opportunity to sell that value to customers. And I think that, particularly obviously with many of the startups coming into everything, as we talked about before, concrete, electric vehicles, solar, nuclear, methane in terms of agriculture, you name it. And we're involved in a number of different projects with clients in these different areas as well. Um, Almost inevitably, you see these firms sort of looking at how can they create a new solution that delivers a new value proposition to the customer on a lower cost curve. So for
Mhm.
example, I think my favorite example of this would be um, solar technology obviously started off very expensive, uh, you know, per unit of electricity. That technology 20 years ago was almost impossible to see how, on a marginal cost basis, solar would ever compete with, coal or gas or anything like that. And certainly now at scale, that technology is demonstrating very competitive economics and, the ability to bring those solutions to market really quickly. So I think, we have seen how as these solutions reach scale, how industries start to change. The UK is just shutting down its last coal-fired power plant almost as we
Hmm.
speak, which is obviously very interesting to see that come to life. But then when you look at sort of, let's talk about companies for a minute. Like it's easy to sort of pick out the challengers, right? Those who are, kind of bringing new solutions to market. In the really fast-moving electric vehicle market, we're seeing BYD starting to really challenge Tesla.
Tesla.
Tesla was
Yep.
the kind of the early, the early player that was really driving that. Setting aside any of the politics around Tesla, BYD has created this vertically integrated juggernaut, which is really all about reduction of carbon at every part of their complete supply chain, from the customer all the way back to the ships that deliver the cars and the power that's used to make them. So, that's sort of a full cycle circular approach to EVs that Tesla's not really focused on. They're much more focused on the end customer. I think
Right.
it's really interesting. Who are some of the
But
companies
just speaking on that point
that,
though, you go back though when Tesla was introduced, I mean it was really focused on only EVs, right? So
Mhm.
it's embedded in its vision and its existence was to be a sustainable environment. Whereas the traditional automakers, right, they didn't have that and they've been playing catch up ever since. So they were really seeing it more as probably being dragged along because it's something like they felt like they had to do, but it still had their traditional business, their core business that was really sort of probably slowing them down from moving at a more faster pace into this new space.
I completely agree with you, Rondo, but I think the challenge that we see is, I think Tesla competed by offering that value proposition to consumers. The
Right,
consumers responded to that. And I
right,
think, Tesla has sort of evolved over a decade and now exhibits many characteristics of an incumbent,
right.
whereas BYD is now challenging Tesla, offering that same value to the end customer, but taking it one step further by integrating sustainability across their entire value chain, um, energy, shipping, right, manufacturing, all of it, and bringing that into a full cycle solution. So to me, I think that's another step forward. You mentioned earlier how integrating sustainability into the business model, companies like BYD have taken that extra step and sort of, now they're not quite there with a full circular approach, but one could imagine that that will evolve as battery tech, for example, continues to, benefit from innovation. Are there other companies? Let's look at it, maybe some in traditional incumbents.
I was thinking on the retail side, there was Patagonia.
Love
Patagonia,
Patagonia.
outdoor apparel. I mean, they were totally focused on, sustainability at the core of that operation. And they have a very strong customer loyalty because of that, focus on sustainability.
Okay, can we unpack that one a bit? I think
Okay.
Patagonia is very interesting.
Yeah.
So,
Patagonia is number one market share in the outdoor apparel space, you know. And I saw something today that said that, 13% of all the searches of the top 30 companies in that space, 13% of the searches are for Patagonia. So there's a lot of interest in their apparel. And they
hmm.
do it because they really look at reducing consumption, repair rather than replacing products. And like that's how they think about it. Like it's again, this is because it's been woven into the organization's vision and strategy as opposed to, a standalone.
I'll
Like,
forgive the pun there, Rondo.
right,
But yeah, but Patagonia started that way, right? So if I'm not
right.
mistaken, Patagonia was developed around, I'm not sure what type of plastic, it was PET maybe,
Yep.
where um, essentially Patagonia apparel, at least the fleece, one of their main lines, was made out of recycled PET. Is that right? From plastic bottles?
I think
And
so.
and so over the last 25 years, Patagonia has kind of created this kind of end to end, again, like BYD, full cycle, complete supply chain focus to every single element of every aspect of every product, looking to source sustainable product and energy efficient use of uh, conversion of those products. Is that
Hmm.
fair?
Hmm. Hmm.
And I think the thing that strikes me the most about kind of that approach is, aside from the vision and the way they kind of organize themselves to completely integrate sustainability into every part of their value chain, um, the environmental profit and loss is something I find really interesting. Their ability to provide climate accounting or sustainability accounting for every single product, like how you might be able to, for example, and this is something many firms really struggle with, just getting product and customer level profitability,
Profitability, yeah.
for their products. Patagonia can get climate and sustainability statistics on every single product in terms of sources and uses of
Right.
carbon, water, waste, et cetera, and the economic and social and impact benefits of each of those. So to me, that's like a completely new way of looking at how we measure and monitor sustainability, and put your money where your mouth is by taking accountability for that at every product level.
Right. I mean, but that just reinforces the point that sustainability is really at the centerpiece of its strategy, right? It's woven throughout its strategy. It is the core of the strategy for that organization. It's not an afterthought.
Yeah, completely. And the thing I wonder about is how that sort of capability can then be integrated into a firm that wasn't designed with a clean sheet
Hmm.
from with that philosophy. Because of course, I think at the beginning, Patagonia had this vision of how do we create, a zero impact kind of firm, which that was built into the architecture. And it's been a 25 or 30 or 40-year sort of adventure for them to uh, kind of architect each of these elements. Obviously, a lot of innovation, continuous improvement, and so forth. But if you look at a Dow Chemical, or an Alcoa aluminum, forgive me,
Hmm.
um, a mining company, how do you build this into these incumbent businesses that may have been around for 50 or 100 years, who have, much more kind of capital intensive
Right.
sort of industries?
So one of my clients, as I said, they is a client in Latin America, and they actually have, sustainability. They don't call it sustainability, but it's basically an ESG type strategy, but it is a part of their integrated strategy. It's one of the priorities that they look at as an organization on a regular basis, the leadership team does. And it relates to the products that they produce, which are, appliances, large appliances, but also in terms of how they support the local economies in which they operate. So it's sort of connected somewhat like, the impact investing, impact economy kind of thinking. So I think that they recognize that if they're going to thrive as an organization, they need to also be helpful to the communities in which they operate, where they have their manufacturing plants, where they have people. How do they support that community? So they see sustainability beyond just the natural resources, but also in terms of how they support the communities in which they operate. And they have
Mm.
goals around that. They have strategies. They've created, like scholarship plans and programs, and really they help with creating water sources in communities in which they operate and manufacture. So there's a lot of ways that, again, if the organization is thinking about this holistically as being integrated into their strategy, then sustainability can take up a bigger part of what they're doing, as opposed to just being something that they're looking at for compliance reasons only.
Okay. So, all right. So from, I guess your theory there is then that the incumbent organization can deliberately build these elements into
Yeah,
their operations, into their strategy, into their culture, et cetera, and see the payoff from that.
right.
And so okay, we sort of probably agree on that. And I think that we haven't really talked about this, but in most of these industries, whether it's appliances, oil and gas, tech, we've talked a lot about AI on this podcast, and the energy intensity of AI is off the charts. So, inevitably, um, like in any other sector of the economy, there will be challengers coming to offer up alternative solutions, either to integrate into the operations in a B2B sense of traditional incumbent industries, or to replace them.
Right.
We talked before briefly about nuclear innovation and solar innovation and energy. That you can see it happening over year after year. The mix is changing, and it's clearly displacing incumbents in these economies. You'll see the same thing in agriculture, as for example, as those who are creating low methane cattle compared to those who are delivering high methane cattle, there'll be a shift. And
Yeah.
the low methane cattle, as long as per unit, the unit cost of low methane beef is lower or the same as their traditional beef, you'll see that displace that sector of agriculture. And that just applies to virtually every part of the economy. One day they'll work out how to clean hydrogen will play a role, for example. It's virtually unlimited. But I think the thing is, the playbook for sustainability and the insurgent mindset in sustainability is virtually the same for anything, right? It's
Right.
how do I, as a leader, look at this as an opportunity rather than as a threat or, a pure compliance exercise? How do I wrap my leadership kind of approach and my culture around sustainability to create new sources of competitive advantage? Then how do I activate consumers to be able to, to move in that direction to displace my competition? And then to your earlier point, how do I re-architect my business model to generate simultaneous economic and sustainability benefits at every level? Now, it sounds like a huge job, but
Hmm.
if you don't have a zero-sum mentality, which is kind of core to the insurgent mindset, the world isn't a zero-sum game. In that sense, then the opportunities to discover the triple play of new consumers or customers, a lower cost curve because we're delivering the business model in a different way, and environmental and climate outcomes. That's the triple play.
A
That's
win-win.
the
Right.
triple win. So
Right.
I think there really is a great opportunity for leaders to think differently in this area. Are there
So if
other
you,
companies, maybe some challengers that you have on your mind that are coming up that are perhaps
I was trying to
interesting
think
to
of,
discuss?
in the sneaker space, Nike has been getting a lot of challengers lately, and a couple of them are uh, companies that are really produce sustainable sneakers. I forget
Hmm.
their names. I think one is it off Hook, I believe is the name. I may have gotten it wrong. I believe Hookah, their sneakers are sustainable sneakers as well. There's a couple of different brands that have been launched in the past couple of years that they're focused on the sustainable market. That's how they've launched, and they're really growing pretty quickly. I think those are a couple of examples in that space of sustainable organizations.
Okay. Things that I think are really interesting. I'm interested probably in the ones that make the big difference. So obviously energy. Um, I think cement companies like Sublime, who are thinking really differently about um, how cement, for example, which is a huge climate contributor, can be re-engineered with bioagents and things like that to reduce the the CO2 emissions of
Hmm.
of cement. Like I mentioned already, the agricultural applications, everything from plastics to methane emissions. I think that's really interesting. You have companies like Ruminate in Australia working very hard on that. I think also I mentioned earlier the innovation in particular in nuclear. So we really have two major areas of innovation in nuclear. One is nuclear fusion, which is getting traction in an area that was always 10, 20 years away. We're now seeing really significant traction. But also we're seeing an innovation investment in small reactors and in particular thorium salt reactors. So finally, we're getting some innovation there. I think there's really across the economy, if you look really hard, you can see some really interesting things happening, which are, setting the pace to disrupt and change
Yeah.
some really core industries.
I was talking to a group of construction leaders and leaders who do energy solutions in manufacturing, but they're servicing also, let's say, the real estate market. And you see sustainability and energy concerns are big. So if you are a builder, you're looking for solutions that are sustainable solutions that help you with some of the regulatory requirements coming down the pike around electricity and lighting and things like that, and water usage, etc. If you are a company that creates building management systems, for example, you probably want to think about how do you create these systems that integrate all of the various, whether it's the electrical system, the security system, et cetera, and how is that done in a sustainable way? Those are really growth opportunities for companies, I think. And that's been a big deal.
Now, just as a bit of fun, in the research for this podcast today, Rondo, I came across a company that you might really find interesting, which is called Rondo, which is a company that does intermittent power solutions, and they basically have a very innovative technology to create these thermal heat batteries that store energy at a high very and deliver energy through the clean cycle from solar or wind into a thermal battery, which then can store that energy for a very long time and then deliver that energy on demand. I thought
Hmm.
you might find that one really interesting.
Interesting.
California company. Um, might be one of your clients.
Right, right, right.
Um, okay, so really interesting territory. We probably could explore this, ad nauseum, but I think the really, again, the lesson that I'd like to impart to, the leader seeking to adopt the insurgent mindset is that, fundamentally, there doesn't have to be a trade-off.
Right.
And but it's hard work, and you have to kind of think differently about how you engage the market, how you architect your business model, how you build your culture, and you have to measure these things. And you have to be really focused on not just the dollars, but also the climate impact. And I think we saw with Patagonia that sort of accounting is something that we expect will be more widespread in the future.
Yeah, but that's why I think it's so important that, leadership teams and their boards really be intentional about, seeing sustainability as, the future. It's not something that they can sort of put off. Like they really need to be focusing on making that a core part of their vision and their strategy for the organization. And then everything will sort of fall through from that. Then you get your culture in line, et cetera. But it's got to be that commitment that we see this as a valuable way to create value while also doing the right thing for the environment.
That's the key, right? I think that last point's really important. We're not talking about altruism here. What we're talking about is the board fronting up to the organization saying, how can we make more money and create more impact at the same time? And
Absolutely.
that's the challenge, right? And holding accountable these organizations to lead through that challenge and discover ways to kind of capitalize on that win-win.
Yeah, awesome.
Great. Well, great to see you today, Rondo. Look forward to our next go around. And again, I'm Matt Tice with the Insurgent Mindset.
I'm Rondo Moses. Until next time.
All the best. Thanks, Rondo.
Bye-bye.